The Mayo Experience.
Mayo Experience. Mayo Experience. Mayo Experience. Experience.
Welcome to the Pat Mayo Experience, continuing our coverage of the 2018 football season. If you hit the description, boom, you get the PME draft kit right there, rankings, analysis, stats, everything you want to know, all completely free. Plus, give the episode a like, and in the comment section, if you want to get in a draw for some DK bucks, tell me your favorite win total of the season, either over a number, under the number, your one single favorite, then leave your DraftKings handle, and boom, you're in a draw for some potential DK dollars. Joining me on the line today to kind of give a macro view of what's going on in football, it's Warren Sharp from sharpfootballanalysis.com. Warren, thanks for doing this.
Yeah, no problem, Pat. I've been a fan from a distance for a while now, so happy to be able to talk to you on one of your shows.
Well, I think it works out both ways, because I've been a big fan too, and we've never really made it work. Even when I was at Fantasy, you were always on with Morency, and you can't have so many people yelling at you like that in the course of a week. So I think this works out a little bit better. We can sit back, we can spend some time talking about the football season. Can you let everyone know about the book that you have out right now? Because all I see over Twitter is people just lounging outdoors in the nice weather, just absorbing everything that you've written about the season.
Yeah, I love getting those pictures. I try to retweet those when I get them in, because it does remind me of the good old days when I was a bit younger, not writing books, and actually could just go to the store, purchase one, and relax and read it and just consume it in a very comfortable setting. But this book, it was definitely not relaxing to write. I started about 2 weeks after the Super Bowl, gave myself a little respite, and then got right back to writing. Basically for about 4 months straight, putting together the entire design, like everything in this book. People think, some of these magazines or books have, a crew of 20 people working on it. For me, it was just me. And then I had Evan Silva spearhead the editing process of the narrative sections and improve that. He added some fantasy nuggets on each team. But for the rest of it, it's like a hardcore dive into what I thought happened with teams last year, why they won or lost games, like from a true analytical perspective, how they changed from last year to this year based on offseason movement. In addition, what I think that movement's going to bring to the team. I discussed some philosophical things about the coaching and what they're going to try to do this year and whether or not I agree or think that it will work, and share tons of data and analysis throughout that process on each team. So it's like 252 pages. It's a really deep dive into it. But I think there's going to be something for everyone, whether they want to bet on games this fall, whether they want to play DFS or season long. There's tons of information in here that should help.
All right, if you want to purchase a copy of Warren's 2018 season preview, go to sharpfootballanalysis.com or just hit the description, the link directly to being able to purchase. The PDF will be up there right now, or you can get your hands on the hard copy version. I know people still buy like fantasy football magazines, which is the most bizarre thing in the world because they're buying them in like the beginning of June, and obviously the stuff's not going to be up to date by the time that the end of August rolls around and you're actually doing fantasy drafts. But people love having the physical hard copy, myself included. I love having the hard copy. And was that like by design, like you wanted to make sure that there was a hard copy because so many people enjoy reading it that way?
Yeah, pretty much. I mean, I have a hard copy sitting right, my left hand is sitting on the hard copy right here at my desk in my office. I am a fan of being able to pick something up and flip directly to the page, as opposed to clicking some buttons on my mouse and trying to pull up the copy, which I also have open on one of my monitors. But it's still, for me, it's easier just to find the book and flip through it. There's color coding in it, so I can easily jump to whatever chapter that I want. But it's just a easy thing to grab and bring with me wherever I might go on trips to meet with different people. It's just something easy to have in hand. So I love that comfortability. There are some people who prefer the PDF and they like that. But personally, if I could only have one, which is not an issue for me since I wrote it, but if I could only have one, if money was something, then I would be buying the book rather than the PDF. But of course, I make more money on the PDF, so I'm going to push that a little bit harder right now. But the reality is, this was not written as like a money-making enterprise. The amount of total money that I make on this is dwarfed by what we're doing in terms of betting and my income from that. So this book is mainly written because I need to research these teams for my own knowledge for the upcoming season. And so when that's how this book even started, is I was doing so much research. I figured, why don't I just organize this a little bit and then share it with people, because I put so much legwork into it to start with. And so that's how the book came around, is like sharing something that I'm working on because I need to know this information, and then I can share this with other people. Now, through that process, it turned into me spending a lot more time writing about things for other people. And so it became less of a labor of love and more like a hardcore effort to get this thing done. But at the end of the day, I find it extremely useful to keep referencing back to myself. So I think other people will as well.
Well, this is a perfect time for the book to come out, and a perfect time for you to be on, because as many have realized at this point, sports betting, now legalized in the United States. It's going to go on a state-by-state level. I know that DraftKings is soft launching their new app in New Jersey. You can get on the reservation list for that, and they're offering the free cash-out option, which is something Bet365 does for the rest of the world. So do a lot of other sites, Will Hill as well. But what do you think, there's going to be so many people jumping into this betting market for the first time ever that just would never have placed a sports wager before in the past. What do you think is going to be the biggest flaw that these new people go in? Is it just going to be betting on their favorite team?
That and betting at any price. They're not going to understand the market for pricing. And as professional bettors, we realize that there's nothing more than the best price. I mean, that defines your edge, is the juice that you're paying and the line that you're getting. So we will dismiss bets and not even make wagers if we can't get the right line or we can't get the right juice on a game. If there's competition and we've got 20 different outs that we could get down at, we're going to find the one that has 2 cents cheaper on juice, and we're going to hunt that out and go there. That makes a difference in the bottom line when you're betting thousands and thousands of dollars and you're doing it frequently every single day and every single week throughout the course of the season. Those few cents add up. And what people are going to end up doing, unfortunately, is they're going to have one out, maybe two, and they're going to like the over in a random Falcons Saints game at 51 points, and they're just going to go ahead and bet it, no matter that the fact that most other books have it at 51 and they can only get 52, and the juice is minus 125. They're still going to bet that. And you ask them, well, why are you betting the over at 52? Forget the fact that it's 51 elsewhere. They're just going to say, well, these two teams have great offenses, their defenses aren't that good, and so I think the game's going to go over. Not realizing well, what line do you think is the fair line to set? What should this hit? And then the book's at 52, so you think there's enough value there. They're not going to consider that. They're just going to say, I think there's going to be a lot of points, and I think it's going to go over 52. So that's the frustrating part about talking to more novice bettors, is they bet their favorite teams. They bet games just because they think a certain thing's going to happen, but they don't consider whether or not there's value in that number, and they don't have enough outs to really figure out if the place that they're betting is going to offer them that value or not.
Well, one of the first things that I've heard from a lot of people that are looking to get into this, especially for football season, you hit on it, is the juice. People just don't understand what something like minus 135 next to a number means. And I even saw this, the FanDuel Sportsbook, they were offering head-to-head golf matchups, and both players were minus 185. Who in their right mind would ever bet anything like that?
Right, and that's the problem. What you almost need to do is have the odds, and you don't even have, for example, this is what I would suggest to people, and maybe this is going to be too advanced, but it's still pretty basic. You don't even need to have an account at Pinnacle. Okay, but what you can do is you can go to the Pinnacle Sports website and you can look at the odds that they're offering on most of these competitions, and you can see how close the newer sportsbook offerings are to what Pinnacle Sports has. Pinnacle Sports doesn't accept U.S. customers, so you personally, a random guy, is not going to be able to open an account there, but at least check to see with one of the sharpest books in the world what lines they're offering to compare to what lines you would be getting, and make a decision. Is this completely wrong, or is it pretty close, and so I should feel okay about it? I'm trying to suggest that only because I know some of these people don't have the options of having multiple outs. They don't understand that. They just are very basic. But I'm happy that, Mississippi's opening sports betting and New Jersey has it, and other states are going to be starting it and opening it as well. And unfortunately for those people that are in those states, most of those guys are just going to walk up to the counter or get the app and just bet what they have, as opposed to looking and shopping and seeing if there are more options or better prices. But at a bare minimum, just launch your website, launch a internet site, and go up to Pinnacle Sports and see what those lines are compared to what they're offering you at that brick and mortar sports book that you're going to.
Since there's not going to be a whole lot of competition or completely out of the gate when it comes to places to go bet or even apps that are launched by the time football comes around, do you think that some of these books are looking at this as a way to take advantage of the customers?
Unfortunately, I think that's inevitable, especially the guys that are first starting out that have never done it before. That come from other lines of work. That's definitely a potential. And I think, if I was advising those companies, I would actually go the exact opposite way, because here's the thing. The immediate press that you're going to get out the gate, if you put up funky, phony lines or things that don't make sense, or things that the top 5 sports books in Vegas and the top 3 offshore aren't offering lines that are anywhere close to as bad as this. The negative press, I mean, there's no like official watchdog groups for sports betting lines that like exist on social media, but there are people out there who bet on enough sports that can smell phony, funky lines a mile away, and they can be in Las Vegas but see the lines tweeted out from one of those sports books in New Jersey that opens up, and make a big fuss about it, and then raise that to perhaps not complete viral, but they can raise that to enough levels that people, in those states are going to be like, whoa, what's going on at this book here? Maybe I'll make, second guesses about going in there or looking elsewhere to get my action. So these books out of the gates should just open up right in line with everybody else. I mean, literally, you don't have to do so much bookmaking. We see it all the time in Vegas. They just copy lines from offshore. They don't even worry too much about risk management out the gate. They're copying opening lines. They're letting the lines open in Costa Rica, and they're waiting 6 hours, seeing how those lines move, and then they're opening their lines out in Las Vegas, and then they're adjusting based upon some of their own action or as those offshore odds move. These guys can do the exact same thing, and then they're not going to raise flags about being unfair or screwing their customers, and they're going to get better long-term action because there's going to be more favorable PR initially. But the worst thing to do is open up with these funky lines here at the beginning of August, when what's really going on, Pat? Baseball? I mean, there's that total volume that you're getting is minimal, and yet you'd be smudging your name by putting out these phony lines when you want people thinking highly of you come football season, which is the big season in September. Who cares about making a ton of profit on the little baseball action that you're taking in right now?
Well, I think the most egregious thing that I've seen so far was an Arena Football League game line that opened, and I forget what 2 teams were playing, but the favorite was minus 14 on the spread, and the underdog was plus 11. How does that even make sense?
No, and I don't know the facts behind that. I was told that was a phony pick, like the guy fudged that, because that makes absolutely no sense. And I think David Purdom of ESPN uncovered that was not legitimate. But the fact remains, I have seen plenty of those lines from that FanDuel book that you're talking about, and they are not priced in accordance with the rest of the industry in terms of the way that they're setting the juice on games. So just somebody needs to be paying close attention to that and calling them out when they see it, so that they can fall in line pretty quickly. And if there were competition in the state, then you would feel that those lines would come into shape a little bit easier. But without competition, and with everybody knowing that brand name, they might feel like they could just do whatever they want. But I'm telling you, the PR on baseball games in July and in August is not worth the screwing yourself for regular season football in September. You need to be in the public's good graces by that point in time. So I'm not sure what they're PR strategy is, but it seems like their sportsbook strategy is to screw the customer, it looks like.
Before we get into the actual NFL stuff, the other newbie thing that people are going to go to, and I'm guilty of it myself, everyone is just gigantic parlays, parlaying in general. Can you tell people why parlaying stuff is probably not the best idea?
Yeah, the odds just reduced tremendously. Look, it's hard enough to win betting sports. Our goal is 55%. Now we pretty much exceed that, especially my NFL totals definitely exceed that on an annual basis. But if you're talking long term, betting a lot of money because you're rolling over things like you're betting every single day and you keep betting, your goal is like 55%. That's profitable on standard juice minus 110. You got to hit at least 52.4% to start making money on top of that. And so it's very difficult to stack up all these different games and hit. And the funny part is you see people sharing their tickets on long shot futures, big time parlays of all these different teams. And yet they're never going to share the losers. They're never going to show how many times they parlayed for a month before that until they actually hit one. And at the end of the day, the question you're going to have to ask yourself is, how am I making money on this? Am I doing this to try to make money, or am I just doing this, throwing a couple bucks each day onto some parlays and hoping to get paid? Because my advice is, if you are going to parlay, you want to try to parlay things that are somewhat correlated. You can find games in the NFL where you could parlay underdogs with game unders if you think there's enough value there. There are things that you can do to give yourself a little bit better edge, but that's just like a 2-team parlay. You're not going to want to parlay like 10 teams and hope that those types of things hit. In addition, out in Las Vegas, they offer parlay cards, and those are I don't want to say a massive money making opportunity, but there's opportunity to beat those because they post the lines and those are stale lines. So they're not changing over time. So you can see what the lines were, let's say on Thursday when they put out the cards, and then you can come in on Saturday morning or Sunday morning and get different lines sometimes. And so you would parlay the things that have advantage, where the lines are worse now, where money has come in on one side, but the line on the parlay card hasn't adjusted for that or accounted for it. And you can get a better number than currently exists. The problem with betting just random parlays off of live bets that are being offered is that all those lines are constantly adjusting. So you're not getting any like value as soon as you place that bet. So my advice is you want to limit the number of total parlays that you're making in terms of how many you're combining together. And while there are certain situations that a parlay might make sense, it's going to be far less than what most people think. And at the end of the day, you just want to be careful. You want to be careful about those bets that a sportsbook's offering you, where you're going to get a massive payout like winning a lottery. They're not just giving away free money, as we can see by what the lines are being set at FanDuel. So they want your money, and they're going to give you odds when you are putting together a lot of things that probably have very little chance of winning.
Finally, on the betting front of things, like on Sunday mornings, people always talk about line movement and which way is the line moving? Has it gone from plus 3.5 to plus 3? Have you lost that hook, that 0.5 edge? So now a field goal would end up becoming a push. But I think a lot of people tend to overanalyze this, especially as it pertains to something like DFS or trying to get on the other side of the trend. Just because a line moves doesn't mean the sharps are pounding one side. Is there a place where people can go to look at the total amount of dollars invested in a game, and then you can go see, hey, 80% of the money is on one side, or 80% of the bets are on one side, but the money is about even, to know which side the big bettors are actually putting their money down on?
I mean, there's a couple, but the problem is whether or not those are legitimate, where they're pulling in their lines from and the money from. And so I don't really want to stamp my seal of approval on any of them, because I'm not even sure of some of that information myself in terms of where they're pulling stuff from. But for years, having been on like the public side of things where I didn't have connections, back in the late 90s and early 2000s, and I was just looking at some of those different websites that show bet percentages and things of that nature, and trying to look at reverse line movement and things of that nature. And now, for the last decade or so, working with several syndicates and seeing into accounts and understanding where the sharpest money is going on the different games, and then being able to see the public's reaction to that just based on the line movement, I can say that it's very difficult to win simply by thinking that you're looking at reverse line movement or fading, the public or things of that nature. It's just difficult to be able to use the line movement as the ultimate gauge for that. Because oftentimes even lines that will be moving in the middle of the week, those are being taken as setups for later in the week where the guys can get down far higher volume on a better number, and they're setting the line up earlier in the week for that action. So I can only say that unless you have somebody in the know, unless you have somebody who is experienced and has like that information as to where the sharp groups and big betting operations are actually placing their money, it's going to be difficult to just think that the real side that they want based upon what you can publicly see at any website. I don't care if they're saying here's the money or not. It's just going to be very difficult. So my advice is take it with a grain of salt. You do want to be very cognizant of how the books are adjusting the line and the point spread, because that is very important, and most of these guys, they're not just going to adjust it for no reason. So they are taking in some sort of money when they're adjusting these lines. The question is, what is the purpose of the money that's being bet? And that's the real question that you're not going to know.
All right, let's talk NFL, the actual teams, actual players, and I have some narratives I want to talk about right off the jump. And you talked about trying to predict potential coaching philosophies that come in. I think John Gruden is a nice test case for this in Oakland. He's going to be there for apparently 10 years. I don't know if he's going to make it there. I have very little faith that John Gruden is just going to come back and make a return to coaching and all of a sudden just be a really sharp guy when it comes to play calling, personnel, and anything like that. Is Oakland a team you can see yourself picking on, or do you have faith that Gruden can just adjust to today's NFL?
Man, Oakland is one of the most complicated teams for me to figure out, in part because that whole AFC West offers a lot of questions between coaching movement as well as quarterback movement, and then you got the Chargers with a bunch of injuries and frustrating coaching that hasn't changed but is still there from last year. So that whole division is tough. But with the Oakland Raiders in particular, you wonder if all this smoke that's coming out of Oakland with we're watching film from the 76 season and we're studying these things and we're going to add an extra fullback and we're going to do all these things, if all the hype that's going on there is really going to play out that way, or if it's just going to be they're learning a few new techniques or strategies, but they're still going to play in an aggressive, modern manner, and perhaps more modern than we might think. Like, we don't know that until we start seeing them execute some of their preseason games. So I think they're one of the teams that we should be most paying attention to in terms of how their preseason coaching goes and what philosophy they take when Carr is in there starting games for them in the preseason. But I have a feeling, they've got, although Gruden added like a lot of aging players that we really question, the issue is they still have a pretty good overall offense. Like, they still can execute. And so while I've been down and sort of mocking a lot of their movement and decision making from a personnel perspective, the one thing that Gruden has been good at throughout his coaching career is actually dialing up plays that work and actually calling things that work. The more he gets involved in the personnel decisions, the worse that team is going to get. And we saw it with Khalil Mack as one example. They're paying guys like Doug Martin and all these other aging guys to come in, but they don't want to play their Pro Bowl linebacker. So I don't really know from the long-term perspective how they're going to do with the personnel. I think the longer Gruden's there, the more messed up it has the opportunity to get. But this upcoming season, with the roster they have from a play calling perspective, at least offensively, I think they're going to be fine. I think they're going to be okay. I'm not in love with Carr for any at any point. I think he obviously had a down year, and how much of that was injury related and how much will Gruden get him back on track this year, I think that's to be determined. I think they'll be better than some people think, who think that you're just going to be a total dumpster fire offensively. I don't see that being the case whatsoever. But at the same time, do they have the talent to possibly make a run to the division championship? Yes, they do have the talent, but do I think it's likely? I think it's less likely that that actually happens, but I don't think they're going to be a total disaster, at least offensively.
One of the big things in my fantasy rankings this year is I have Zeke a little bit lower than a lot of other top end running backs. It's not like he's buried. I have him number 6 at running back, and that's for full PPR scoring only because I just don't know where the receptions are coming from. And like, as you pointed out, like he has the 8th most snaps of any running back the past 2 years, yet the targets just never seem to come. And they do things like bring in Tavon Austin and talk about how they're going to split him out of the backfield and potentially throw to him. For ages, they were throwing to like Rod Smith out of the backfield. Like, I don't quite understand what the reluctance is to use Zeke, but is there a potential where he could basically just turn into what Gurley did from last year, where all of a sudden you're averaging like 3.8 targets per game, and then, you know, a new coach comes in and, hey, where you're averaging 5.9, you're the best fantasy player? Do you think that Jason Garrett could put a system into place where they actually start throwing to their best player?
You know, in a normal world, you would say yes, but this is Dallas, and Jason Garrett and Scott Linehan have had Zeke there for several years now. You know, I saw an article up on ESPN just the other day that, oh, well, now we don't have as many threats in the passing game as we've had before. And, you know, Zeke has been really underrated. He's such a great player. He can catch the ball well out of the backfield. He's so good when he has the ball in his hands in space. So, of course, we're going to use him. And I'm thinking to myself, like, did you guys just pick this running back up from free agency? Like, how, if you know all this stuff about him, then why aren't you using him in the first few years? And you're trying to tell me that last season, like, passes to an old concrete-footed Jason Witten or Des Bryant was going to be better upside than passes to Zeke in space? Like, let's be honest. I think they're just totally paying lip service here to the fact that, you know, nobody's going to call them out on not throwing them the ball enough. But the Cowboys last year, they threw to running backs just 15% of early down pass attempts. That's the 3rd lowest in the NFL. They are just very reluctant to throw the ball to these guys. And will they change this year? God, I hope so, because they need to. I mean, running back passes on early downs are one of the most secret weapons in the league. And it's no wonder that teams like the Saints and the Patriots call so many of those types of plays, and teams like the Cowboys don't. It's because those teams study this and understand those efficiency edges. I would love for them to do that. I think it makes perfect sense because I think the receiving corps in Dallas is a big time problem. I think it also makes sense from a career longevity standpoint for Zeke to get more of his touches as receptions as opposed to rushes, because the more times he's running up there through that line, I don't care that they are the best line of football from a run blocking perspective. Those guys can fall on top of you. You've got defensive linemen who are extremely heavy that can fall on top of you, mess up your lower extremities. And that's something nobody wants to see happen to Zeke. Whereas you throw the ball to him in space, he's got time to catch it, see where he's going, size up where he wants to run, and have more opportunity to plow over some of those shorter defenders that are going to try to tackle him one-on-one, as opposed to plowing through the line of scrimmage. So I think it's in their best interest to do that. But as you mentioned, will Jason Garrett call those plays? And I'm a little bit less likely to think that he will. I'll say this. He'll get more receptions this year than he has in the past, but it still won't be enough.
A lot of people, when they talk about strength of schedule, simply just look at last year's records and project everything out, which seems like a really bizarre way to project strength of schedule, but it's a narrative that's caught on and a lot of people just believe it. Can you walk me through your process of how you try to project strength of schedule? Because I think it makes a lot more intuitive sense.
Yeah, I appreciate that you realize that. That shows that you're paying attention to the right things, because you're absolutely correct. I mean, the reason they do that is because it's easy and it's been done before. And that's unfortunately the mentality throughout the NFL so much is, well, let's do what we've done before. Let's just do the way it is done. And the easiest way is right after their week 17 game ends, we know the schedule for the upcoming season in terms of who you're going to play. You don't know what day, what week, but you know who it is. And so you can draw up a strength of schedule based on the win-loss record of what just happened. The problem is you get coaches that get fired after that point. You get players that move to different teams. You get the draft. So it makes no sense. And I've done regression analysis and proven that looking at prior year win-loss record is completely unuseful. It literally has no merit towards what is going to actually happen this upcoming year. So what I do is I look at, and I started doing this a few years ago, and I believe, as far as I know, I was the first person to do it by this method. And it's the most intuitive method, a great word you used, and that is to study what the odds makers do with the season win totals. They're the ones who are putting in time and effort on figuring out what coaches are new, what players have moved, what players are getting drafted, and they're spending more time working on these win totals than they have in the past. I remember when win totals used to come out well before the draft. And now they're not putting win totals up. I mean, I'm talking to multiple sports books because I know they're sports book managers out in Las Vegas, and they're hesitant to put up the lines until the NFL draft because they know that guys are going to bet into these things and they don't want to be so far off on them. So I look at the season win totals that are projected from Las Vegas. That's going to be a better indicator of what that team is going to be this year than would their record from last year. And then I can determine strength of schedule based upon that. And the other thing that enables me to do is I can track movement. I can look at what the win totals were back in early May, and then I can compare them to what they were here right before training camp starts in late July. And I can look at how much has the win totals moved. For instance, the Buffalo Bills, the most bet to the under team that's out there. So everybody, the line movement and the juice has all shifted on the Buffalo Bills win total to make them be a worse team now than what was projected by lines makers back in May. And as a result, you can factor that into the schedule for this upcoming year. And because the Patriots play the Bills a couple times, guess what? Now their schedule has gotten a little bit easier because our perception of the Bills is worse than what it was back in May. So I can use this as a fluid ranking system to move things around as we're seeing money being bet and odds makers move the lines. And I think it's a very good representation. It gives us our most accurate way to look at the forecasted strength of schedule is using these win totals as a dynamic element.
So the teams that have benefited the most since the win totals were posted to now, you posted this on your Twitter the other day, the Giants, the Colts, the Dolphins, Denver, and New Orleans. And I'm guessing it's the Giants and the Colts simply because of Barkley. Everyone seems to be healthy, and if there's a healthy Andrew Luck, people will want to bet the over on the Colts. The other way, the teams that you mentioned, the Buffalo Bills being the team sort of most bet against, seeing the most money put on the under, the Bills, the Niners, the Bucks, the Seahawks, and the Steelers. Why do you think the Steelers are up there?
I think that there's just the Le'Veon Bell issue is the primary thing. I mean, people were wondering if he's going to come back, hold out, how long he's going to be held out for. Is that going to affect him? And anytime you have like a player of that magnitude, people are going to be a little bit more hesitant to bet on them. And so the guys who want to bet against the Steelers are going to be firing at that point. And you're probably going to get money bet on the Steelers when Le'Veon Bell shows up and starts doing things. So I think that that's probably the reason why you're not going to have anybody rushing to bet the over on Steelers because they know that they could probably get a better number later on.
Is there any way, like we talked about, fading the public and that being very difficult to figure out if you're going to do it properly, if you can even do it at all? Is there any way to look at the win totals and make a stance on a team like someone like Arizona? Arizona is 5.5, what I'm seeing right now, at least on Bet365 in terms of win total. You buy the win total against, they have the toughest strength of schedule overall. But 5.5 wins seems strange because, like, let's say if in your mind, like the Rams aren't going to be quite as good as they were last year, or the Seahawks are going to drop off a cliff, or I mean, the Niners are one of the teams that people are betting to the under as well. There has to be wins that crop up somewhere. Are there any of these underdog teams or positions that you see on teams that you think you might go the other way on?
It's possible. I haven't fired on any. What I would typically do is if you want to go the other way on something, you want to wait until as late as possible. So, for example, I wouldn't want to be firing on a team like the Cardinals right now in terms of a futures bet because they're not taking, they've moved up a tiny bit, but the time to fire on them, I think, would be a little bit later when you can get some people betting against them, especially when people start seeing how good the 49ers and the Rams look in the preseason. The people are going to be less likely to want to bet on the Arizona Cardinals at that point in time, thinking that they're win total is going to be harder to exceed. So there are definitely teams. I mean, a team that I fired on earlier when the whole world pretty much was against them was the Indianapolis Colts. This was back in early May when the story on Twitter and everywhere else was Andrew Luck hasn't thrown a pass in 500 days. Is it going to be a disaster? Is he ever going to play football again? I mean, these literally were the stories that were coming out. And the great thing about social media is things tend to get a little bit viral, especially when you're making jokes or somebody's funny on Twitter and people will retweet that. So stuff like that gets propagated all around and everybody starts thinking that way. So the bookmakers came up with these really low lines on the Indianapolis Colts. And I looked at the Colts as a team, from a completely different lens through my study in February and March as to what this team was last season. And this team last season was a team that was actually leading entering the fourth quarter in 8 of their first 11 games. The only teams that led more often were the Eagles and the Patriots, who both met in the Super Bowl. This was a team that led in entering the fourth quarter in 9 of their games last year, but they were a team that only won 4 of those games due to horrendous play calling and decision making, very predictable play calling, which I detailed in an article in the fourth quarter that cost them a number of these games. And they were dictating their play calling, just telegraphing it based on the personnel groupings that they were using. Lo and behold, the coaches get fired after the team wins 4 games. But during that time, they're selecting Jacoby Brissett in a trade with the Patriots. Brissett, completely unfamiliar, gets traded to this team a week and a half before the start of the season. He hasn't worked with anybody on this team in the offseason. He hasn't worked with any of the coaches or any of the play calls. They bring him in. He can't even get ready for week 1 because he got there just so recently that they go out to the Rams with their backup and get blown out in that game. And then they come back and start Jacoby Brissett from week 2 onward, who, like I said, very little familiarity. Oh, by the way, they're playing the 3rd most difficult schedule of opposing defenses. So there were just so many chips stacked against the Colts last year. And I looked at the way they performed and I said, even if we don't have Andrew Luck this year, everybody thinks the Colts and Brissett are going to be horrendous. And I see a team that did better than most people think last year, that had a coaching change, that got Frank Reich in there. I love what they're doing from that perspective with their play calling and intelligence that I suspect that they'll utilize this season that they weren't using last year with Chuck Pagano. In addition, I see an opportunity with some players that they drafted offensively. I think that Chris Ballard's done a very good job. Yes, they still have holes. Will they win the AFC South like they did for several years when Luck was, entering the league? Probably not. The AFC South is very difficult. But can they exceed 6 wins, which was what the total when it opened? Yes. Will they do better than being favored in only 3 games, which is what the odds makers opened when they set the weeks 2 through 16 lines? Yes. So I bet on the Colts at that point to kind of fade public consensus. I bet them on 4 individual games during the course of the season to fade public consensus at spots I thought that they were undervalued. So there's different times and because one of the other reasons is I knew that once Andrew Luck came to camp and once he started throwing the football, everybody's going to be talking about Luck is back. And that line is inherently going to move up just because they see Luck. And personally, while I want Luck in there because I think it's going to help, I thought they could exceed those totals even with Brissett in there all season with a full off season with a new coaching staff. So I just saw enough value there, and that was the time to get on the Colts. I think there is times to get on other teams that the public is going against, but now is not that time, in my opinion.
All right, so overall, the easiest strength of schedules for teams this year, the easiest starting at the top, the Patriots, Texans, Chargers, Jets, Green Bay, Miami, Baltimore, and then Oakland. There's 2 teams in there. One, I have really no idea what they're going to do, and you did sort of a critical breakdown of them. They've already lost Verrett. They've already lost Henry. Their offense is a bit banged up. Their exceptional pass defense, I mean, without Jason Verrett, it's a bit tough, but the Chargers, have an easy schedule going forward. Like you already mentioned, that AFC West might be a bit tough to figure out going into the season, but what can we expect from the Chargers despite being on paper really good, but when we see the results are going to be really just confusing every single week?
Yeah, the problem for the Chargers is their coaching. I mean, they were the team that ran the ball the most one of the most in the league in 1st and 10 situations in the first half. They were getting no yardage there, but they continue to do it. They've done it the last 2 years. But the one thing is they started shifting from that philosophy midway through the season last year. And they got a lot better. Obviously, they had a better success rate. They also started targeting Hunter Henry a lot more than what they were doing in the early part of the season when they were overusing Antonio Gates. So they made some improvements, which is why I'm not sure what we're going to get out of them this year. I can confirm they don't actually have an analytics department on their team, but they do have some of the members in others wearing other hats that supposedly look at some of these things, but I'd argue they're not looking at them closely enough if they're making some of the decisions that they were making. So I don't have a lot of hope from that perspective, but the fact that they did modify some things and performed better is something that maybe you could have a little hope that they will, continue down that path. It's just hard to understand and figure out right now because coaching is so important in the NFL. A lot of people overlook that element of play calling and decision making, but whether it's from a game planning perspective or in-game decisions, it's massive towards the outcome of those games. They obviously lost some games last year because their field goal kicker screwed up and they weren't targeting Hunter Henry and things they were doing on 1st and 10. But and none of those situations are going to happen this year, right? Like Hunter Henry's done. So unfortunately, they can't use him more because he's not even going to be an option. They got rid of that kicker. And who knows what's going to happen with their play calling. Maybe it'll be better this year on 1st and 10. The frustrating part about the Chargers, in my opinion, is they have the most talented roster in the AFC West. One of the most talented in the entire NFL, but that's been the case for several years. And due to, in my opinion, coaching and management, they never seem to hit their threshold. They never seem to hit their ceiling. It's been very frustrating to watch. I really want to see Phillip Rivers, because he's such a competitor, get into the postseason and have another run at this thing before he hangs them up. Will this year be the year? I mean, they have the best chance this year to make the postseason and win their division, but will it happen? That's more figuring out what the coaching staff is going to do. And since I'm not talking with anybody inside there, I don't know what their strategy is.
One of my favorite over-under bets, and I haven't done my over-under show yet. I actually haven't placed a wager on any single over-under yet, but I think the one that is sticking out to me the most is Baltimore over 8.5 wins. You're getting plus money on that right now as well. And I just try to think about Baltimore, from the macro version between this year and last year. Like Joe Flacco, yes, there's competition with Lamar Jackson behind him, but he is another year removed from a massive knee injury. It's not like he's the greatest athlete to begin with, so that extra recovery time could really help. Their offensive line was just banged up all year. Now it comes into camp healthy. Of course, that could change throughout the preseason, the first few weeks, but the trademarks of Baltimore seem to continue to persist even last year. Like the defense was top 5 per DVOA, the best special teams, and that is a very consistent thing year over year. And you talk about maybe the Chargers for years have had bad coaching. In my mind, Baltimore has some of the better coaching going on a consistent basis. And if people are going to bet the under on the Steelers, it frankly seems kind of strange. A team with a top 10 easier schedule by win totals is playing plus money for the over, and they were close to this number last year, and theoretically they should be a lot better, shouldn't they?
I think they will be better. I'm extremely excited with the prospects of getting Lamar Jackson in there. I agree with you, Joe Flacco, in part because his health, in part because of the pressure from a backup legitimately pushing him, drafted in the first round, mind you, should be better. But the issue is, like, Joe Flacco's been so horrendous for much of his last 5 years. I mean, it's just appalling, truthfully, how much this guy's gotten paid. He's been the highest paid quarterback in the NFL since 2013 and produced the NFL's worst yards per pass attempt, worst touchdown to interception rate. And I want Lamar Jackson to be out there. But the great part about it is, what I see from their coaching perspective is they've got Harbaugh, who is more of a gambler. He's a little bit more of a risk taker. He comes from a special teams background, and he's more likely to try less conventional things offensively, in my opinion. You've got a couple of offensive coaches, starting with Marty Morningweg, who turned Michael Vick when he came from Atlanta, where he was more so a great runner and a downfield passer with hits and misses, to like an exceptionally better passer when he was starting his first year up in Philadelphia. You have Greg Roman, who's worked with quarterbacks. I mean, the read option that they were doing and the zone read stuff with Colin Kaepernick in San Francisco when he was destroying the league and going to the postseason, that was under Greg Roman as his OC. So I think you're going to have opportunity to work Lamar Jackson into the game plan, to throw wrinkles at the defense that they might not otherwise anticipate. You do have better receivers. I hope we see a renaissance of John Brown because he's such a great player to watch. If he can stay healthy out here on the East Coast, that would be tremendous. They have an underrated defense. They're very good defensively. So I won't disagree with anything you're saying. I think if there's a team in the AFC North who's going to exceed our expectations, you know, a lot of people have higher expectations of the Browns, and because they didn't do well last year whatsoever, and they should have done better. And I agree with that. But in terms of the other three teams, I would say it's the Ravens. I don't disagree with you one bit.
All right, so finally, the hardest schedules that you have projected out right now. And you can find this all up in graphical form on Warren's Twitter page at Sharp Football. But Arizona, Tampa, Seattle, the Giants, Kansas City, New Orleans, and Detroit. Just finally, do you think that there are teams that are overrated coming into the year just straight off the hop and some that are just completely underrated, even taking strength of schedule out of it?
Yeah, no doubt about it. I mean, there's some teams. I think the Bills are one of the apologies to Morency in advance, but like they're one of the teams that I thought was just the most overrated in the league. I've got so many reasons why. It would be hard to fit into your podcast.
Well, can we just say that the main one is that they're the Buffalo Bills?
That's definitely the main one. Look, they were 0-6, I believe, when they tied or lost the turnover battle, but 8-2 when they won it. They took one of the NFL's most reliable quarterbacks at throwing interceptions, gone. Now they're replacing with potentially a rookie or a backup. And even if those guys perform at the NFL average level, that means they're going to be throwing twice as many interceptions as Tyrod Taylor threw last year. They got weaker on the offensive line. And I mean, for those reasons, plus a myriad of others, I think that they're going to be in some trouble. And I was shocked that one of the books in Vegas opened this win total at 7.5. They won 9 games last year, and they wouldn't take we couldn't get as much down on that as we wanted to. So we grabbed the line at 7. And what we did was we were able to get the book to raise their limits for us, since we know people there. And this is actually a good book that doesn't hate players that win. So they actually agreed to raise their limits for us, so that we, will continue to give them our action, because they like to know where the sharp guys are betting. That's such a appealing thing to a very few sports books. Most of them want to kick out everybody who has a pulse and actually can win, and only get the action from the squares, but then they'll never know where the sharp guys are actually betting, so they don't have an idea of where they should be setting their lines. But nevertheless, this book took a significant amount of money for us for a season win total. I mean, it's still less than what they would take on games during the regular season, especially on a Sunday. But at any rate, we went as strong as we possibly could on the Bills at under 7. And I still think under 6.5 has a little bit of value if you can get 6.5. But no, there were a number of teams, and that literally had nothing to do with the schedule. I mean, they're middle of the pack in terms of their schedule, but I think it's going to be a very difficult season for them. But absolutely, there's several teams that I've bet from a win total perspective, and I bet more unders than I do overs at this point in time, because number one, there's more value there. I mean, the books are shading these things towards the overs. There's more potential wins here than actually could legitimately occur in the league. There's more than 256 wins that they're circulating on these. And so there's value there towards some of the unders, but you have to go on a team by team basis and evaluate it. And certainly there's a few teams here that I think are going to be worse than what odds makers are projecting, ignoring strength of schedule.
The book I'm looking at right now has the Bills 6.5, but to bet the under, you're paying -165.
Yeah, that's the team that's been bet down the most of any. And I mean, I posted my ticket on them earlier on Twitter. So in part from, me and other people with influence talking about the Bills under, their season win total. That is, I think, drives some people to kind of follow up on that. But and truthfully, there are some of the teams that I was betting under are some of the teams that have moved towards the under the most. So that's unfortunate, but getting less quality lines now than you could back in May. But I think that's sort of the market consensus on a couple of these teams that I think will be worse. And there are a couple teams that I thought will be better. And one of them I mentioned was the Indianapolis Colts, and obviously they moved up a ton. So I do think there's still value in the win totals. And the great thing about the win totals is that perceptions are going to continue to change. We haven't even had our first preseason game yet. So once we start seeing multiple preseason games, we see some more injuries, there's going to be teams that offer more value than what the odds maker has set, whether it's towards the under or towards the over. So I'm going to continue to bet the win totals between now and the start of the season.
Warren Sharp, at Sharp Football on Twitter and sharpfootballanalysis.com. Check out his 2018 NFL season preview. If you go to sharpfootballanalysis.com, hit the description. The link will be right there for you to purchase that PDF or find the hard copy book on Amazon. Thanks for doing this, Warren.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Pat. It was a lot of fun.
All right, I'm Pat Mayo. You can follow me on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook at ThePME. Remember to give the show a like and go enter the contest in the comment section on YouTube. If not, go leave a review on iTunes, Stitcher, Podomatic, Audio Boom, Spotify, iHeartRadio, TuneIn. Anywhere where you can download podcasts, the Pat Mayo Experience will be there on demand for free whenever you want it. All right? I'm Pat Mayo. Thank you for watching. I'll see you next time.
That Mayo Experience! Experience!